industry changers from across the globe about their past, present, and futures in business innovation and life. I enjoy helping people build their portfolios and bring out the authenticity of their business. Let's get started with today's guest. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
I am Michael Castleman, and I am speaking to you from San Francisco, California.
Okay, San Francisco. It must be hot there, or is it raining?
It's lovely today in high
Great.
60s, but I'd rather be talking with you, Kimberly, than being out in the sun today.
Thank you. Let's just go ahead and dig into your past, leading up into what you do in the present. Obviously, we talked briefly, so tell me more.
Well, I grew up outside of New York City, and I went to the University of Michigan, where I developed an interest in writing and journalism. And I started writing for the underground press, the alternative weeklies of the Vietnam War era. And I had I gravitated towards sciences, and so it made sense to write about health and medicine because that's a perennial subject, and lots of people are interested in it, and lots of publications were interested in publishing good health writing. And so I was a health writing magazine journalist for 35 years. And I wrote for all of the big national magazines, the women's magazines, the men's magazines. I wrote for hundreds of magazines back in the 20th century. And then in the 21st, there's so much health information on the World Wide Web that I decided to refocus on sexuality because I felt like there were very few people writing about sex research. And so basically, I cover sex research now, and I have a blog on Psychology Today called All About Sex, where I have posted twice a month for 15 years, and I have more than 60 million views.
Okay.
So the publisher of my latest sex book, Sizzling Sex for Life, calls me the world's most popular sexuality writer. I don't know if that's true, but it may very well be. I don't know anybody else who has 60 million views. And
Yes.
meanwhile, while I was writing 3,000 magazine and web articles and 19 books, I developed a hobby of an interest in the publishing industry. And my latest book is a departure from health and sexuality. And it is a history of book publishing aimed at authors and aspiring authors. And it's called The Untold Story of Books.
Wow, that is amazing. Tell me more about your sexuality book. Was it like, have you ever did a dissertation on it or a project where it's like 500 pages long or something? Like, how many pages is this book?
Well, the Sizzling Sex for Life is about 450, 500
I
pages.
kind of
It's
figured.
actually my third sex guide. I wrote a sex guide in my late 20s for young men, and I wrote a second sexuality guide in my late 40s when I had kids and I was a long time married, to talk about more middle-aged sexual issues. But with A Sizzling Sex for Life, which I wrote when I was 70 years old, I felt like what was needed in the field was a comprehensive look at sexuality issues throughout the entire lifespan. So there are specific issues that children are interested in around sexuality. There are parents, teenagers, young adults, people with young kids, and sex for older people. So usually these subjects are the subjects of their own books. I mean, there are plenty of books about how to talk to your kids about sex or sex for elderly people, but there was not a single book that sort of combined all of them and talked about all of the common issues of sexuality through the lifespan, from the sexual implications of circumcision to sex in nursing homes, which is becoming much more common these days. So I saw an opening to write a book that would be comprehensive and that would discuss all of the subjects that are typically important to people as they move through the lifespan. And I've been very gratified that reviewers and people who've gotten in touch with me have said I succeeded, that it does present a sort of once over for sexuality throughout the lifespan.
Tell me healthy sex tips for minors. Like what do you write in that book that is for minors to learn about, so when they get on their journey towards relationships with other peers or people, they will have a make smarter choices.
Right. Well, for the youngest kids, you're not talking to the children, you're talking to the parents. And
Okay.
there's a whole section in Sizzling Sex for Life about how to talk to your kids about sex. And the mistake that most parents make is that they feel like they have to provide a dissertation, and they say to themselves, "Well, I'm no expert, so how can I talk about this?" The good news is that you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be super articulate. You don't need a PhD in sexuality. If you're a parent trying to talk to your kids about sex, all you have to do is try. Say how you feel briefly. No need to really elaborate. Most kids will take very quick, young kids will accept very brief answers to sexuality questions, and then they'll move on to the next thing. If you're, the book then moves into talking to teenagers. And the issue with teens is it's very natural during the teen years to be interested in sexuality and to start to explore it, but it has to be done safely. And
Okay.
school sex education programs are, in my opinion, terrible because they don't, it's not sex education, it's all dangers of sex education. And kids need to learn about the dangers of sex. Kids need to learn how to avoid unwanted pregnancy and sexual infections. But what kids really want to know is how to have pleasure. And sexuality education in schools never, never, never mentions pleasure, because that would be politically upsetting to a lot of social conservatives. And so, even in the most progressive, comprehensive sex education programs in public schools, for example, the one here in my hometown, San Francisco, is very good, but it never mentions pleasure. And so, and I think it's easier to sell safe sex when you tell teens, listen, if you want joy, if you want your partner to be happy with you, if you want sexual pleasure, then you'll have safe sex. Because who can relax with somebody who doesn't care about infections and pregnancy? And relaxation is absolutely fundamental to good sex. And then the book proceeds to talk to young adults about their sexuality and hookup culture, which has received a tremendous amount of press. And during around 2010,
Mhm.
the media were in a frenzy. Oh my God, Tinder, and everyone's hooking up, and where there are wild orgies in the streets. That's not true. Young adults today are less sexually active than their parents were at their age, and they are more likely to practice safe sex than their parents were. So, today's young adults, they're fine, they're all right. In fact, one of the main issues with today's young adults is record rates of celibacy of young adults not having any sex. So I talk about that, and then it moves on to discussing. You're a young parent with young kids. Can you still have a sex life? Now, a lot of parents believe they can't, but in fact, they can if you prioritize it. And so the book goes on from there to talk about common, everyday sexual issues throughout the lifespan.
Where did you get the statistics for the children that are celibate,
Uh, there's been a
practicing?
tr- there's been a lot of research on this in the last 5 or 10 years,
Mhm.
and the latest figures, the best figures that I'm aware of, are that somewhere between 20 and 25% of young people age 18 to about 25 have no partner sex at all. They may have sex solo, but they don't have partner sex for a variety of reasons, um, and social isolation during COVID being one of them. But
True.
even apart from that, young people are more wary. They're not as into jumping into bed with people as my generation was, and so there are good things about that, and there are bad things about that. And so it depends on your point of view. But that's the situation we have: is that a lot of young people are celibate as far as partner sex is concerned.
Okay. And tell me about geriatric or elderly, like you said that they have like 30 to 50 have to prioritize, which is true because they are working, they're taking care of the children, and they have to prioritize their sex lives. So tell
Right.
me, what do you say in your own words about that? How do they prioritize?
Well, sex is a natural part of life,
It
and
is.
but it's not a required part. If you don't
True.
want to have sex, you don't have to.
I agree.
So if you're in a long-term relationship, when people get together, there's the hot and heavy period that lasts for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, when people can't keep their hands off each other. But then that subsides and sexual urgency subsides, and you become what's generally known as an old married couple. And the assumption is that old married couples don't have a lot of sex. Well, it's very individual. There are people who are in their 40s and 50s who have no sex at all. There are other people in their 40s and 50s who have sex several times a week with their partners. And so it's really an individual thing. And the most important thing is that the big problem of long term relationships is desire difference, that one wants more sex than the other.
Hmm.
And usually it's the man who wants more sex, but in about a third to a half of cases, it's the woman who wants more sex. And there are there are many ways to deal with this. Sex therapists have developed an effective program
Hmm.
that helps people negotiate a compromised frequency and make the most of it. And I outline that program in Sizzling Sex for Life. And that because desire difference is the number one problem in long-term couples, and it has a solution if you're willing to be a little flexible.
This is very interesting. And have you, my heart tell me you've spoken, you spoke places about this before. Have you?
I spoken about it?
Yes, yes.
Yes, I've been trying to promote this book for 5 years. So, yes, I've spoken at conferences and on
Cool.
podcasts. But the thing is, I don't have to tell you, Kimberly, there's so much noise out there about sexuality that it's hard to uh, dig down into the truth. And my book, Sizzling Sex for Life, is 100% research driven. It covers all the research. In fact, I reviewed 2,500 studies to write that
Wow.
book. It's and it's not a lot of sex books are written by psychotherapists or sex therapists who talk about what happens in their office, the people who come in and profiles of, Susie and Sydney, which is fine. That's perfectly acceptable, marvelous. There's some of those books are very good. And I have friends who are sex therapists who have written some of those books. But I also felt like, as a journalist and as someone who has reported on the research literature for 50 years, I felt like there was a need to have a comprehensive research-driven guide that would bring people up to speed on all of the latest sex research about all of the subjects that are common sex problems in life.
Tell me, well said. Tell me about your other book.
My other book, my latest book, is The Untold Story of Books. And it's been a hobby of mine ever since I signed my first book contract way back in 1979, if you can believe it. I thought, well, God, if I'm going to write books, maybe I ought to learn about the book industry because I'm in that industry. And I was fascinated by books anyway. My mother was a librarian. So I grew up in libraries. I grew up with books all over the place, with her constantly reading, and I became an avid reader myself. And I was very interested in the book publishing industry, which is often shrouded in mystery and mythology, uh, uh, which confuses and frustrates authors. I know a lot of people who are authors who have published a book and it came out and they expected it was going to do great and it didn't do very well at all. Well, why not? And the reason is that the publishing industry has changed tremendously since 2000, when we moved from industrial publishing, which is the model that most authors and readers are familiar with, the publishing as it was in the late 20th century, to today's digital publishing, which where the number of books has absolutely exploded, and sales per new title have plummeted as a result, because there's so many books to choose from that people make their choices, and the pie is sliced thinner and thinner and thinner. And so today, well, let me say this, that in 1980, American publishers released 45,000 books. That's 1980, 45,000 books.
Okay.
This year, publishers and self-publishers will release 2 million books. We've had 2 million books released every year since about 2005. And so the number of books has absolutely exploded. But what's happened, and there's good things about that. One of them is that publishers, if a publisher says no to you, well, you can always self-publish, or you can always go with a hybrid publisher that's a publisher for hire who you pay to publish your book. So the good news for authors is that it's easier than ever to publish books today. The downside of that is that everyone's publishing books, and so there's more and more and more of them, 2 million a year, and it's very hard. It's harder than ever to get any notice for them or to sell them, to the point where today, if you can believe it, Kimberly, today 80% of new releases sell fewer than 100 copies. So that's 8 in 10 books sell in 2 figures, and only 6% of books sell 1,000 copies. Now, I'm delighted to say that my book, The Untold Story of Books, has struck a nerve with writers, and it's already sold 2,000 copies, which puts it in the top, 3 or 4% of titles released this year, because there's really no other book like it that describes the actual evolution and economics of modern publishing.
So basically, modern publishing has pushed out over 2 million books since 2005. Over 2 million books a year.
2 million books a year,
Yeah.
Yeah. So What that means is that, well, just to put it in context, that means 7,500 books a day. That means during the time that you and I are talking, Kimberly, another 30 or 40 books are going to be published in the United States. And as a result of that, every book becomes like a blade of grass on a golf course, or a snowflake in Antarctica, or a thimbleful of water in the ocean. There's so many books, it's unprecedented. And it's very hard to get attention for books. And if you go to author sites on the internet, that you have, most of the authors are screaming like, how come I can't get any attention for my book? How come no one's reading me? And that is why I wrote The Untold Story of Books, to clue authors in on the actual economics and what's happening in publishing today.
I'm pretty sure you got a tip on how to get yourself out there for those who are listening. Like, how do you push yourself out there? You got over 60 million people, viewing your books, and listening to you,
Yeah.
you know. So, how do you get yourself out there?
Well, first of all, let me engage about one of the myths. The myth is that if you have a lot of social media, you're going to sell a lot of books or sell a lot of CDs or whatever. And sometimes that's true. It's usually not. I mean, my blog, my sexuality blog on Psychology Today, has 60 million views. Is my book, Sizzling Sex for Life, a bestseller? No, it's done all right, but it's not burning up the marketplace. So it's very hard to publish books, even if you have a strong social media presence. And my advice to authors is that, sure, have an Instagram, have Facebook, whatever, use social media, but the people most likely to buy your book are the people people you have a face-to-face relationship with. And so I encourage authors to have a wide circle of family and friends who they can go to and say, okay, here's my book, please buy it. And remember, if you only 20% of books sell 100 copies. But what that means is if you can sell 100 copies, you're in the top 20% of books. So most people know 100 people. And if you can sell your book to 100 people, you're in the top 20% of new release sales.
And what in turn did you basically said that you got the people that you know. How do you get the people to come to you that you don't know that will be curious about this book and want to read it as a good read?
Well, I do what everybody does. I promote. I have a zippy Amazon page with a lot of book reviews on there. I have a page on bookshop.org, which is the leading competitor with Amazon. I hired a publicist. I did, for Sizzling Sex, I did about 30 radio shows and podcasts. For The Untold Story of Books, it's more like 40. I've been as active as I can be. But, you only have so much time and so much money.
Exactly.
And it costs money to publicize things, and it takes a lot of time. So what I tell authors is have a strategy, pace yourself, and do what you can afford in terms of time and money comfortably. I'm not going to mortgage my house to buy advertising for my book. That's ridiculous. It's not going to pay off. But I am going to go on podcasts, and I am going to send email. I have a zippy little PDF poster for The Untold Story of Books, and I send that out to everybody I know. And with the holidays coming up, I'm sure, Kimberly, that you have some friends and family who are writers or avid readers who love books. And so I'm telling you that The Untold Story of Books is the perfect gift for you to give to them. So check it out.
Where do you see yourself going in the future with everything, Michael?
Well, I'm 74 years old now, Kimberly. And so I'm seeing the runway is getting a little short there as I look to the future, but I intend to keep on keeping on. I continue to write my blog. In fact, I wrote a blog post this morning based on a new study, and I am going to continue to promote the untold story of books and write about the history of publishing. I have a Substack newsletter where I cover the history of publishing. And, you know, I like my life. I've loved being a writer for 50 years. I think that's what I always wanted to do. And I early on when I was in my 20s, I just didn't know if I'd be able to do it. It seemed so impossible. But I just kept cranking away, and it worked out for me. And so I'm going to keep on keeping on as long as I can.
How can people like reach you?
I am at my website is mcastleman.com. That's mcastleman.com. And you can, and that's features all of my books and everything. That's pretty much where I live on that's my headquarters on the web.
And the totality of your books is 19 books, right?
19 books, yes.
Wow. That's amazing. Wow. So, tell me, well, we have to go. So, in under 30 seconds, what would you like the audience to know about your book in under 30 seconds?
Well, I'd like them to know that the Untold Story of Books is a fun read. People really have liked it, and if you're if you're a writer, either published or aspiring, or you're a book lover and you're curious about the publishing industry and how this crazy thing works, then Untold Story of Books, I hope you find it informative and amusing.
Well, I want to thank you, Michael. Stay on the line. I want to thank you guys for joining my show. You take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys next time.